Did I ever tell you how I got the nickname, the Dragon of the West?
I'm not interested in a lengthy anecdote, Uncle.
It's more of a demonstration, really.
Hello and thank you so much for coming back to Tea Time. I once again have my co-host Paco on, and today we're going to be talking about, more writing stuff today. Paco?
Yep, we get to talk about how to write good characters who have a villainous past.
And before somebody brings out who they're going to talk about, we specifically are going to talk about Uncle Iroh. I know. But before you burn us at the stake, hear us out.
Yeah, we have actual words to say to defend this idea.
Yeah, so, the only scene I can think of, which is actually the scene that is going to be at the beginning of this tea time, is did I ever tell you how I got the nickname the Dragon of the West? Which, for the record, before Uncle Iroh is Uncle Iroh is a general that is literally trying to take over Ba Sing Se. So that is not a title you just get because your guys like you. That's a title you get because you're really good at, the war criminal shit.
Yeah, and if my memory serves, I think part of the narrative on him gaining that title is that he claims to have killed the last dragon. Also, not, like, the most noble of actions.
That is true. And I know I was talking to my editor's wife about this. Sammy, I love you, but also you are wrong. She tried to sit there and tell me that Uncle Iroh comes to this come to Jesus moment all on his own, and I looked at her and I was like, Uncle Iroh has his come to Jesus moment because his son dies in a war he is profiting from. That's why he has his come to Jesus moment.
That is my recollection as well from what I've read of Avatar, because unfortunately, I still have not actually watched that whole series, but boy have I read a lot about the story writing of that series.
It's really good.
Yep, that is everything that I have heard and everything that I have read. I ultimately I am reasonably familiar with all of, or at least most of the characters in this series, just from the amount of writing and talking that other people have done about how well done the series is. So I throw that out there as the caveat of, like, I haven't watched everything myself, but I am reasonably familiar with all of the major story beats and characterizations of at least most of the main characters, just because of the amount of coverage that has gotten over the last many years.
Yeah. And I remember I listened to somebody, right, who was like, we get it, Avatar was a great stuff, but stop talking about it. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Avatar is like those 1 in a million kind of things where you gotta keep talking about it because every time you rewatch it, you notice something new.
Yeah, and they do such an incredible job of the characterization of all of these major characters and how they fit into a broader story. Like, the impressive thing about Avatar: The Last Airbender to me as a amateur writer isn't so much the overall narrative so much as the development of all of the characters within that narrative. And Iroh is no exception.
Iroh
is no exception.
Right. Even though we, the audience, get to meet Uncle Iroh when his character growth is technically done, it's the fun part about characters. They're like you. You never really stop growing. You just get better at how fast you're gonna grow.
True.
It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
And I think it's the reason why when Ozai puts his hands on Zuko and burns him and banishes him, I think the reason Uncle Iroh left with Zuko wasn't because, he was told to. I think in his mind, he could not understand and could not fathom the idea of burning your own child because they talked back at you a little bit.
Yeah, especially given what we know, at least later in the series, of Iroh's character and past.
Right. So I was talking about this specifically with the editor for a little bit today before we got on for tea time, and he made a really good point, and I'm going to repeat it here. So, Celestial, I'm stealing this from you. I love you lots. He made the point of, even if Uncle Iroh wasn't shown to us in the series as being a very loving man, considering the fact that he sends his nieces and nephews gifts and letters and stuff from the war front, just because he's nice to his nieces and nephews doesn't necessarily mean he was nice to his son. So it might be equal parts regret, because we never spend any time on the son he lost. We only get to see him in the memorial of the Tales of Ba Sing Se. So we have no idea what his son was like. And I was like, why do you do this to me? I have to now repeat this to people.
This is now important information that must be conveyed.
But he does have a point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that completely.
Are you sitting there saying that Uncle Iroh was a horribly abusive parent? No. That is not what I said. What I said was, we know very little about how Uncle Iroh and his son Lu Ten, that is not his name, that is a Mortal Kombat character. I got my own mistake. Jesus Christ. We do not know how Uncle Iroh and his son interacted with each other, because we only know the son in death, which means technically he's a non-character in the narrative. He's a driving force of character growth for Uncle Iroh.
Yes. Yep. I agree with that completely. And what it ultimately means is that how Uncle Iroh treated his son and the relationship that they had, for us, the audience, is in fact unknown. And so it is up to us, the audience, to extrapolate what that relationship could have been like. And therefore, there are multiple interpretations that are available. And frankly, like, as a writer, that is a good thing to have in your story writing. You don't need to spell out every single interaction between characters if you don't have to.
Oh yeah, no.
It is good to leave those areas of interpretation for the audience.
I think that's why in certain mediums, which I have made known, I dislike it just because I dislike the writing, so I'm sorry for the people who love this, franchise. Harry Potter makes me mad, and here's the reason why it makes me mad. Harry Potter's parents are dead before the series even starts. That's great. Throughout the rest of the series...
Not so much for Harry Potter, but...
Yeah. But throughout the rest of the series, it is ham-fisted down our throat what good, magnanimous people they were, and oh so brilliant, and oh so smart, and they died for the cause, and blah blah blah. I'ma stop you right there. They were in their 20s. They married young. They had a kid young.
I think 21.
That's still your 20s.
Serves. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, 20s, but very young 20s.
Right, so they married young. They had a kid young. They were fighting in a war that obviously they didn't have that much information for. It was the Resistance, and they died for it. So before somebody shoves that they were good, magnanimous people at me, it's really hard not to be good, magnanimous people when the other guy is literally Wizard Hitler. There's not too much more room you need when your enemy is Wizard Hitler.
Yeah, and it is worth noting in this example in this example that we are getting some of that from like a Harry Potter's perspective as like the voice of the books.
Oh, even better,
But
a
as you
biased
say-
Potter.
But as you say, like, other people also seem to, at the very least, the writing direction that is used has other characters within the story also talking about the greatness of Harry Potter's parents.
Which make them biased parties, and biased parties will only prattle on about all the good. Now, I absolutely hate Snape in the Harry Potter series, but he's the only one that actually tells you to the audience's face, James Potter was an asshole. He was a bully.
Yeah.
So he's the only unbiased party that we get to see a perspective from, but he's written in such a way that you're like, dude, I have very few fond feelings for you. It's,
Well, and at the very least, he may also be a biased party, but with good reason.
right.
He was bullied.
Right. But do you see what I mean? It's like, he's the only biased
Yeah.
party that is not on the they were good bandwagon. And the reason why I bring this
Well,
up...
at the very least, that Harry's father was not a good person in his youth.
Right. But also, 21, what realistically have you learned from the age of, I don't know, 11 to 21? That's not a lot of room.
It's not impossible, certainly.
Hard, but not impossible.
Yeah, hard, not impossible. I mean, the very fact that, God darn it, why can't I remember the father's name? James. Not impossible that, James learned from the idiocy of his teenage years to being a better person as a young adult, but he doesn't have a, I mean, he did join a resistance against Wizard Hitler. We can give him credit for that.
Right.
But also, like, that doesn't obscure the, or that does not fully amend for his past actions in his youth.
Right. Hello, why did you bring this up when we're talking about Avatar? Don't worry, we're about to come right back to it because I'm about to say this. The reason why this bothers me is because when Uncle Iroh loses his son, Uncle Iroh, even in the flashback, is already a older adult. He's at least 45, maybe 50 years old when this death happens to his son. So his character growth and everything after this makes more believable sense because he has his come to Jesus moment. The reason why in Harry Potter, the fact that they're in their 20s when this happens, I'm going to let you know right now, you know fuck in your early 20s. So if James and Lily Potter had died when they were, I don't know, maybe like fresh 30s, I might be more believable to think that they were good, magnanimous people because they would have had more time to be good, magnanimous people outside of the resistance. But they don't. Therefore, they were good people and we loved them a lot, sometimes rings a little hollow because it rings more like you're only talking about the good stuff because something don't talk ill about the dead.
Yep. And that very easily could be the case in terms of how the narrative is presented within Harry Potter, as I mentioned before, from Harry Potter's perspective. Who is going to be honest with Harry Potter about his father, James, being a bully throughout his entire school age?
His bully, the teacher, Snape.
That's the only character that we see in the books or movies be blatantly honest on that front.
That do be true.
And I will say that I don't see it as impossible for a person in their young 20s to have learned from their teens. But it certainly is not the same as, at the very least, the circumstances are not the same as Iroh in losing his son, which is, I think what they call I think there's a terminology for it called hitting rock bottom.
Or, as the most esteemed scholars call it, every hour is 5 o'clock somewhere drinking stage.
Yeah. But there is legitimately a concept of hitting rock bottom that is the, like, everything that you knew of your life, of how your life operated, has been crushed into oblivion, and you need to rebuild it from the ground up. And that is one of the things where I would argue that the characterization of Iroh is done so well, is that he has this past of success and power on the battlefield as realistically a villain. But one event of his son dying is the hitting rock bottom moment that leads to a table flip reevaluation of his life that ultimately leads him to the character that we see in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Right, and before somebody gets confused, Uncle Iroh's son dies when Zuko and Azula are still pretty young. Like, young enough that mom hasn't, like, killed grandpa and fled yet, but, like, right around that time period. So, between that and his father burning him, Iroh comes back between that time, and Zuko is, what, maybe 10, 11 years old when his cousin dies, and then he's 15, 16 when he gets burned. So, Uncle Iroh having, what, 4 or 5 years to, get his shit together makes sense.
Rebuild.
Yeah.
Put the pieces of his life back together.
At least enough to go home.
Yeah. And in a new arrangement that is not conquest.
Oh, that's true. And here's the cherry on top of this. Oh, that's really horrible, like, ice cream sundae. He comes home. His brother, who is now the Fire Lord, tells him, hey, I need you to sit in on this war council. He does. His nephew talks out of turn, and then he gets to see his nephew the very next day, supposedly, get beaten bloody with fire. And he's not allowed to do anything about it. And then his uncle is like, this kid's about to get banished with, like, a war wound on him. I can't let him go out into the world. He'll die.
Yeah. Like, the characterization of Iroh that we see in the TV series is one like, we, the audience, are led to conclude, oh, this is one of the few actually, like, quote unquote good people in the Fire Nation that is just looking out for others and doing the right thing. And that is an exceptionally good character writing for Iroh in this story, in presenting this development of character that we learn over time of someone that had been engaged in the military conquest before. So this type of character writing isn't that easy to do, and it's something that I personally believe more writers should be engaging in with their works, of having characters that we see in the present day as being very good and magnanimous individuals, but that have backstories of being very morally gray to, like, morally black characters. And even if we don't see it on screen, that development of being a villainous type character into a heroic type character, having that in their backstory maybe presented in flashback or simply referenced back to is something that I would like to see in more media. One of the examples of that, although we don't get to see it for very long because the show got canceled, is the character of Shepard in Firefly. Shepard Book is presented to us as a morally good, like effectively traveling pastor, but there are hints throughout the TV show and later the movie Serenity that Shepard has a very complicated and dark past. There is allusion to it in one of the episodes where he is injured and the Firefly crew actually go to the oh god darn it, why can't I remember what the name of the world of the solar system government is? Regardless, they go to one of their facilities so that Shepard can get medical treatment and are initially refused. I guess spoilers for Firefly. And Shepard is able to, while on the stretcher, like effectively dying, to like signal his ID, and the government person like checks the ID, basically looks at it in shock, and has a rush this person to rush this person to the emergency room right away. It gives us, the audience, a hint that Shepard Book has a previous past with this solar system government and was someone of such importance or someone of such rank that he can just show up unannounced and he will be rushed to the ER.
So I personally have never seen Firefly. Let me rephrase that. I saw the movie Serenity with a friend, and I felt so lost because there was so much going on, and I was like, I didn't see this series. All I know is that it had Nathan Fillion in it. And that's all I know.
Fair enough.
It sounds cool, though.
There is a reference in the Serenity movie as well to Shepard Book's past. This is after the, I think it is after Summer is god darn it,
like kidnapped?
You know what? I don't remember the exact point when it happens within the movie, but the at least what happens previous to it. But there is a conversation between Nathan Fillion's character and Shepard Book in which Shepard basically says that, hey, you're given XYZ, you're gonna have an operative on you, and Nathan Fillion's character basically has we've dealt with people before, it's fine. And Shepard says, no, you don't understand. They, like, operatives are, they are different, and they'll hit you from where you're not looking, and they operate in the shadows. And Nathan Fillion's character basically says, it interests me how much you know about this world, You'll have to tell me about it sometime. And Shepard just says, nah, no, I don't.
Well, no, that's actually a really good way of writing. It's like, you don't understand. The character you, the audience, meet at whatever point the story starts, you're not owed whatever past they have. That's not given to you. You are owed the story from where you started and where it will naturally end. But any background that they previously had isn't owed to you at all.
Yeah. And as a writer, the most important elements of background to include is what's necessary for the story to work.
Right.
In this case, I do think that having these little tidbits of backstory for Shepard were very good in terms of hinting at this character's past, not necessarily for the specific story we're in right now, beyond maybe like providing some hints at we need a character to be able to provide this information for this movie, and by hinting at some darker past of this character, that justifies that character knowing that information. Because we needed someone to say it, and this is the character that it works with.
Right.
But in terms of we need to know every single character's like entire backstory, no, we don't need that as the audience.
The author needs to know every single little detail about the character's background. You're not here. You didn't help me write this, so you don't get to know everything. You get to sit there and enjoy what I wrote for you.
Hopefully all that backstory work that I did means that all the characters make sense in the story.
Right. And here's the thing, right? Because this is kind of where, like, this idea kind of falls apart, is the White Lotus Society, right? The people that Uncle Iroh rolls up with at the end of the series that are all the masters that the gang has met throughout all their travels conveniently. I'm like, you can still be part of a good secret society and still be a villain in somebody else's story. Just so we're clear.
Absolutely. I mean, that also pulls us back to the Harry Potter reference that you had before, where we, the audience, are presented throughout the books of James Potter as being a great and good man. Meanwhile, we have Severus Snape that is going, here, see my memories of how, or rather, Harry Potter going, here, let me, Snape, I'm going to steal your memories to see how my dad treated you. So
right.
less a here, let me show you, and more of a how dare you look at my personal memories.
Well, yeah, considering the memories are basically just non-stop bullying the entire, 12 years they're in school, I don't think I'd want to, relive that. I put that away on a shelf in a room I locked on purpose.
Well, and it's, in story-wise, it's I put that locked away on a shelf specifically so that you couldn't see them.
Right.
But narratively, Harry Potter actually looking at those memories, suddenly we the audience are now presented with the fact that James Potter was a jerk.
That's true. And I wish I could say more nice stuff about Harry Potter, but damn if it's hard.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, to be fair, I also criticize the way that the overall story was written in the latter books. To my eyes, it seems pretty clear that JKR, after she got a little bit of fame, decided, I don't need an editor for this. This is fine.
Oh no, I feel like any good author definitely needs an editor. Which is why when people are like, but Stephen King's such a good horror movie writer. No, he's not. None of the books ever make sense when they end.
Well, and it's even if that is the, if that's the goal, quote unquote, it's that is a thing, that is a way that you can write.
Yeah, I think this is the reason why when people try and tell me that, certain authors are, the gold, right? The Michelin star standard. I just look at them and go, have you actually read it, or have you only seen the media movie adaptation of it, where an actual real writer had to sit down and cobble together all this fever dream nonsense into a cohesive movie? Which one? Because whichever one you tell me will give me real quick insight on what it is I'm working with. 9 times out of 10, oh, I watched the movie. You fool. You've never read the books.
You've never actually read the books. Well, and that's one of the things, tangenting briefly, that is one of the things that, about the, I believe it's the original Lord of the Rings books, that I don't think that there was an editor involved in writing those stories. Like, that was
the longest 6-year road trip
J.R.R.
ever.
Tolkien going, nah, I got this. Which does explain why it can drag in a lot of places, because it wasn't edited to be like a
we gotta
story. Here is look at all of the narrative and backstory that I have fit into my story.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that means that the Lord of the Rings books are bad by any means, but they certainly aren't structured the way most quote-unquote good stories would be.
That's true. Before somebody says that's not true, there is literally a point in the book where you meet a character named Tom Bombadil. And before you ask me who the hell is Tom Bombadil is nobody in the narrative. We spend 4 chapters with this man, and we never see him again.
And there are many hypotheses about who Tom Bombadil is within the story, that go from, like, the whoever the creator of the universe is, Ilu. Oh god.
The god
Lord
that
of the
made
Rings
everything,
fans
like.
Yeah, the god that made everything. Lord of the Rings fans are going to be mad at me.
The Aloha region.
Yeah. To literally, this is the self-insert character of J.R.R. Tolkien.
I guess either answer makes sense, because why are you here? What is your narrative purpose? And I read the books, and I'll say this, I got all the way until about the Tom Bombadil section, and then I had to hardcore quit because I was just like, we've been here forever, and we've done nothing. I think that's why this trip takes 6 years to get done. We do nothing for a long time between certain major milestones.
Well, that's further than I got. I never left the Shire.
Bilbo Baggins is so disappointed in you.
I got like 70 pages in. I didn't get out of the Shire.
I just wanted to make it farther than, like, my sibling at the time was reading, and then I found out he also never got out of the Shire. He lied to me, and I was like, are you telling me I suffered through an incredibly long book to prove you wrong, and you never even got past chapter 1?
Did I suffer through more chapters to beat you, and I didn't have to?
I could have literally just gotten to chapter 2 and been like, I win. No, I got all the way to meeting Tom Bombadil, which I think is like chapter, what, 40?
I do not know. I didn't get that far.
I don't even remember. That's how long that book is.
Yeah. But this is why editors are important. Another good example from a roughly similar time period of a book that is treated as like, oh, this book is so great, but had no editor and is actually terrible, is Atlas Shrugged.
Oh my god.
A book that I have had the misfortune of reading at one point. There is I don't remember the exact number of pages, but it stretches well into the double-digit number of pages in which the main character is essentially monologuing about monologuing over the radio to the people of the world of here is the glorious society that should be created.
Sir, this is a Wendy's. Can you finish your order?
Yeah, basically. Which also does not make sense within the previously constructed narrative of this world, because the previously constructed narrative of Atlas Shrugged is that most people are just complete and total morons that cannot understand anything. And here is this man who is supposedly brilliant and a genius and deserving of effectively ruling the world, monologuing to all these people about how, like, this is how the perfect society should be run.
So again, this is a Wendy's.
Yeah, exactly. But the big point of that rant about Atlas Shrugged is that Ayn Rand didn't have an editor for that book. Like, a large part of why it drags so long is that there was no editor involved in the process. The thing about Atlas Shrugged that ultimately makes it so popular and this is a must read, or this entirely changed my worldview to one of, like, conservative libertarianism where every man for himself. It's the message that the book delivers. It's not that it's good. Like, it's not that the book is good. It's the message that is being delivered. When it comes to Lord of the Rings, I think a large part of the appeal of Lord of the Rings is the level of backstory and world building involved within that book. There is a lot about the writing that could have been tightened up, so to speak, to make it a better read, a better book. But that isn't what people are there for. Like, that's not what you're signing up for. You're signing up for the world building.
Right.
Assuming that you can actually get through the book.
Right. It's the reason why, even though we went off on this tangent to other stuff, the reason why it works in Avatar with this world building is because they lay out the rules pretty consistently and religiously to you, to the point where you're like, okay, there's not a lot of wiggle room in here. The only wiggle room seems to be how people can use their bending, and how they are able to, like, fight effectively with it. That's really the only wiggle room in this world, and I appreciate that.
Well, and the Avatar The Last Airbender also does a very remarkable job of providing you basically as much world building as you need to understand what is going on, and dedicates as much of its time as it can to character building. Like,
oh, yes.
That's a large part of why the characters of Avatar The Last Airbender are so memorable and so, like, good in the sense of, oh, these are such good characters. Not necessarily, like, morally good, but, like, oh, these are whole people to me, not just 2D cutouts.
Right. Like, I know I put on my channel, right, forever ago, The Defense of Azula. No offense, but when I put that out, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get so much hate for it. But I realized as I was editing it, I was like, I'm not technically wrong. Azula is designed by her own narrative structure to be a really well-written, evil, like, character. And she does it really well. The fact that she was left in the hands of a narcissistic egomaniac who was trying to literally burn the world down never seems to cross people's mind, is because you only get Azula as Azula. You don't think about what she went through, considering she's only 14 when this is taking place.
Yeah. And it's, like, that's actually one of the things that when it comes to her character that I do think that like, when you look back on that narrative, it's a, man, Azula is a really, like, man, she is evil in this story, but you can get a sense of, oh, that's how she got here. Like, that's, I understand the path for why she got to where she is and why she acts and behaves the way she does. Not that that redeems anything, but it allows us, the audience, to understand where she got to that point.
Right. And I remember I was talking with friends about Azula right before I did the audio, and they were like, yeah, but we just can't forgive her. And I was like, are we just gonna gloss over the fact that this girl literally has such a bad mental breakdown? She's seeing the ghost of her presumably dead mother in the mirror and having full-on conversations with her.
Yeah. Well, and like, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you need to forgive this person, but, like, I can sympathize. Like, I can be like, wow, I feel bad for this person. I mean, that's one of the things that, that Game of Thrones occasionally does with their horrible, horrible characters, is that sometimes they get thrown into situations where you can actually go, well, I feel bad for this monster.
Just because you have high empathy does not mean that they are good people. It means you are a better person than them, and that's why you're feeling like, oh man, that's rough.
Man, that's rough. I hate to see a person suffer. They're still evil, though.
Yeah. And how do I put this? Zuko's story in Avatar, in conjunction with Iroh, isn't so much a redemption story. It is, but it isn't. And I don't mean it's a redemption story for Zuko so much as it is a redemption story for Uncle Iroh. Is because Iroh babies Zuko a lot. But not so much that he wants to, like, infantilize him. He babies him is because, Zuko, you're a replacement for the kid he lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I actually think that's a good way of framing that as well. Specifically the first thing, that Iroh is undergoing a redemption arc with the way that he treats and attempts to guide Zuko. That on some level, Iroh is trying to redeem himself from his past actions and behaviors as a general of the Fire Nation.
Yeah. And I remember I told this to somebody who, I don't even remember their name. I think we were just talking about this at a place I worked at. We got on this topic and I brought that up. And their exact word, I don't remember their name, but I remember exactly what they told me when I brought that up. They said, do you ever think maybe you're looking too deep into it? And I just looked at them and I was like, no.
Looking too deep into it.
My guy. A cereal spoon still has, like, some give to it.
This is writing we're talking about.
And, executed writing.
It is hard to go too deep.
Right? It's like, realistically, I didn't write this series, so I don't know where the end is. All I can know is that there is supposedly an end. We'll find it soon, hopefully. But there's an end.
Yeah. Well, and there is also something to be said for of the idea of stories belong to their readers. That is a line that the author John Green has used before. Not only about like other people's books, but also of his books. He is pretty, at least in the past, he has been pretty upfront. Like, when people ask him things about, like, well, what happens next in The Fault in Our Stars? Or what happens next in Turtles All the Way Down? Or what happens next in Looking for Alaska? His answers to those, like, to that kind of question of what happens next is, I don't know. Like, when John Green basically, as John Green has put it, the way that he writes the story within the book. And what happens next is not part of what he was considering in writing that story. And so he very much has kind of an attitude of, well, you're the one that's now read it. What do you think has happened next?
Which isn't a bad way to write. Like, me personally, John Green, I'm sorry, I've read your stuff. You're probably a wonderful person, but sometimes I feel like your books are just, they miss me. Because I just don't find those types of books engaging.
That's totally fair. I don't find his books as engaging for me either. But, like, as an author and a person, I do think that he is an absolutely wonderful individual.
Right. So, I think it's a good thing to have that mindset when you're an author is, I spent all this time on building this world and look at what they're doing to it. Yes, you built this world. You only built the map that they have. The part of the map you didn't build is free real estate for them. Let them run around in it.
It's free real estate.
It's true, though.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of the things that I do really respect about John Green as an author, that he has that attitude of, if my readers want to fill in those blank spaces, more power to them. And if some of those blank spaces getting filled in is backstory that I hadn't thought of, more power to them. And I think that we as readers should be willing to do that with stories, like with Iroh in Avatar: The Last Airbender, of filling in some of the context that we are presented in flashbacks of what kind of a person the character of Iroh was back then, to help us understand the type of character and person that Iroh is when we see him in the present.
Right. And, okay, I'm gonna bring this up, and I don't want to make it sound as horrible as it is, but I do have to say this.
Alright, go for it.
In the comic books, we only get to see, like, Zuko's mom's perspective of everything that was happening that Zuko and Azula were probably not aware of. And I was like, oh, that's super neat and interesting. She meets Iroh only once, and she's scared of him. Because the second she sees him, her immediate and only thought is, it's the Dragon of the West. He's won countless battles. Mm-hmm. But she's like, I can't believe he's so close. I'm kind of nervous and scared. And I'm like, right there. Nervous and scared. Nervous because this is her first time meeting her brother-in-law, but what is scared supposed to tell you in this instant? Well, if you have a title like the Dragon of the West, and her immediate thought preceding I'm scared and nervous was he's won countless battles, usually that's a pretty good indicator of you're a murderer.
I mean, at the very least, it is a this is a individual that is cold and heartless on the field of battle. It's like, even if Iroh had not killed anyone by his own hand, the fact that he's winning a countless number of battles on the battlefield is an indication of the type of person he is on the battlefield.
Right, so even though she has no reason to be terrified of her brother-in-law, she still remembers that his reputation has preceded him into that conversation.
Yep.
So that's all that matters. The reputation came before meeting him. And now meeting him, she now has a face to the name, but she's still like, oh, that's nerve-wracking.
Yep.
Because I know it's going to sound weird, but based on the time period that Avatar is supposedly, right, air quotes, supposedly taking place in, we're still not quite out of that era where brother would murder brother just for shits and giggles. Not even to get anything, just because they felt like it.
Well, it's usually for some type of politicking reason, but yeah, like family murder was not a unheard of problem.
Right. Hello, why would you say that? Because in the Legend of Korra takes place in circa 1920, 20-ish, 30-ish Lakeland. I was trying to get past 20. I was like, why am I stuck on 20? 1920, 1930s. Which means, according to the same lore that we're presented in Korra, since it's been about, 60, 65 years since the foundation of Republic City, I'm like, hold on, wait. This is the foundation of Republic City, not the end of the war. Because by the time the gang and all of them are old enough, like, establishing Republic City, they're like in their 30s and shit and have kids. So,
yep.
That means you gotta go back further, which means we're in, like, 1800s land at this point. So yeah, we're
deep into the 1800s.
Right, so we're still definitely in the land of, I'll murder you for looking at me wrong, and I'll get away with it too.
Well, assuming that we're going off of just, at least the broader region of East Asia, China, Korea, Japan, that part of the world. Yeah, like if you take 1920, skedaddle backwards about 75 years, then that is putting technologically in our world, you would be getting roughly when industrialization was just starting to appear in that part of the world, namely in like British and American boats showing up.
Right. Which makes sense is because even in the original Avatar, the airships are the technological advancement that they didn't have before, which I'm like, yeah, that's an 1820s MacGuffin if I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Yep, that is our our early to mid 1800s. Yep, we certainly can do technology now.
Right, and it's the reason why when people try and tell me, we don't know that, it's like, we do, is because when Legend of Korra has all of her little openings for the previously on, it's an old-timey announcer guy on a radio. Very circa 1920s, 1930s shenanigans. Which means if it's been, long enough that...
Very clever, like, hat tips to signal the audience.
Right, if you're paying attention, most shows will tell you to your face what year you're in, without outright saying it.
At the very least, giving you enough context clues to be able to get a rough analog idea of this is the kind of world that we're in right now.
Right, and considering there's still monarchies in the Legend of Korra, right? Like, there's still the Fire Nation and there's still the Earth Kingdom, at least for a little bit before that ends badly for them. But there's still monarchies in this world. So we are definitely in the 20s and 30s still, because monarchies were still a thing back then.
Yep. Well, and like, if we really want to get technical, monarchies are still a thing now, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean monarchies that actually, like, rule, not monarchies that just are, like in England.
The broader, but I take your broader point that the type of societal structures that are overlaid on the world within Korra and within Avatar: The Last Airbender are attempting to be at least somewhat reflective of the time periods that they are analoging to in our real world history.
Right.
Yeah.
So, again, this is very much one of those, this is 1800s land. Realistically, we're not quite out of the Dark Ages yet, but we are definitely, like, right there about to be out of them. So, it's a weird time in history.
It's yeah, in terms of how it impacted historically with in real world for both China and Japan, and I guess and Korea for that matter. Like in the real world, they at that point in time had a very, very isolationist stance, especially Japan. Um, Japan had, I think it was one port, maybe two, that the Dutch were allowed to trade with like once a year. And that was Japan, that was effectively Japan's entire, this is as much contact as we allow with the outside world, specifically the European world.
Right.
And it was the 1800s that European powers really got the technological edge to be able to, as it's called historically, gunboat diplomacy, of sail boats in with a bunch of cannons and go, you're gonna trade with us now.
Right. It's the reason why around that time when the gunboat diplomacy was happening, it kicked off the Meiji era in Japan. And for those of you who don't know,
Yes.
the Meiji era is basically the European traders that came in didn't like the fact that there were samurai and just running around with swords everywhere. And the Meiji era was basically, you gotta get rid of those or, yeah, it's not gonna end well for you. And when they basically tried to pull the, oh, what are you gonna do? They were like, I have a gun. That's what I'm gonna do. Trade.
Well, and part of that impetus of the Meiji era also was that government leaders within Japan itself had we need to do something to even the odds against the Europeans. And so one of the elements of that Meiji era was basically a reordering of Japanese society as it had existed for hundreds, one could argue, 1,000 years.
Right. No longer were there shoguns and stuff. Those were still kind of there, but they were being slowly eased out because that's not how things work now.
The we don't need samurai anymore was a part of that societal restructuring. We don't want a warrior class like this anymore. We want to approach society in a more quote-unquote European style with conscripted armies and not the same kind of, at least, caste-like system that we've been operating under for centuries. And I would argue that elements of that Meiji history are part of the storytelling of the Fire Nation within Avatar: The Last Airbender. Obviously, the timelines are a bit wonky compared to actual real-world history. But like the Fire Nation as an analog to Japan makes sense in the Fire Nation being the aggressive nation against the others during the
100-Year War
storytelling of Avatar: The Last Airbender. That is reflective of the real world history of Avatar invading Korea and annexing Taiwan, and later annexing Manchuria and invading China proper. Now, granted, that took place over decades and decades into the mid 1900s, but that is what is being referenced. That is the actual real world history that is being referenced in the Fire Nation's attack against the others.
Right. It's the reason, like, in my Legend of Korra video, the very long one, not the one that is going to be coming out by the time this tea time is out. In the very long one where I'm like, Republic City is technically a stand-in for Shanghai, only because of how it sits on the Fire Nation, because they show you on the map how it sits. And since the Earth Nation is a allegory for China, right, there is no war in Ba Sing Se. It's an allegory for China. So Republic City is an allegory for Shanghai. And Shanghai, historically, even though it's always been a port town, Shanghai was always a British port town, right smack dab in the middle of China.
It actually might be Hong Kong rather than Shanghai.
Really? Alright. Either way, though, my analogy still stands. It's a port city.
Yeah, the analogy still stands. It's it's really okay. Which port town is it referencing?
Doesn't matter. I know exactly what it's referencing. This is a non-Chinese port town, even though it's right smack dab in China.
Yep. Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because both Shanghai and Hong Kong, until very recently, and I do mean very recently, were technically still British colonies on, like, a technicality, and then all that ended, 4 or 5 years ago?
Shanghai had always been part of China. Hong Kong was specifically a British colony up until, 98, 97, somewhere thereabouts.
Oh, I am super off on my math.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no worries. Hong Kong has been in the news more recently because the original agreement shake hand agreement, signed dotted line agreement in Britain returning Hong Kong was Hong Kong would be able to continue to more or less govern their own affairs for 40 years. And within the last 4 or 5 years, China has militarily suppressed Hong Kong in about that 40-year thing, just kidding.
Right.
So that may be why you were thinking that the handover had happened more recently.
Yeah, again, I've just been out of the loop for, media for a while, especially news, because I'm like, if I wanted to be depressed, I could just listen to people talk online for 20 minutes.
I cannot blame you for that.
Right, but the reason why I'm bringing up the fact that the Fire Nation, like you said, is an allegory for Japan is because, no offense, but if you look at how they dress, if you look at how they refer to each other, if you look at how their cities are set up, I don't know how much more Japanese you want, but we're there.
Yeah. Yep.
Whereas the Earth Nation is a no-duh.
I can never remember what the analog for the Water Nation is supposed to be.
Supposedly they're just supposed to be Inuit tribes? And I'm like, can you narrow that down a little bit more? Do you know how many Inuit tribes there are?
Yeah, for real. The Air Nation, if my memory serves correctly, is supposed to be an analog for, Tibet. Right,
Tibet, Nepal, just...
Yeah.
We've divorced ourselves from the world. You can't divorce yourself from the world. The world is here.
The world will come to get you.
Actually, that's...
This is something that in the real world, that every society that has gone, we are going to divorce ourselves from the world. That is something that they have all had to learn the hard way eventually.
Right, and it's the reason why... It's the reason why when Uncle Iroh is telling Zuko about the 4 elements and everything, and he's like, the air nomads trying to detach themselves from the world and it didn't work. And I'm like, he wasn't there for the massacre of the Air Nations, because there was more than one. Yeah. They were everywhere. But he was old enough to realize the ramifications of it as he was growing up. Because when he said it didn't work for them, it's not that he meant them trying to divorce themselves from the world backfired. It obviously did. What he meant was the world was always going to be part of their lifestyle, whether they liked it particularly or not. Mm-hmm. So detachment works in very specific instances, but it is not a long-term solution for anything.
Yeah.
Which I think is why when Aang goes to that monk guy that's trying to help him open up the chakras, and the final chakra is literally, you have to detach yourself from emotion. I'm like, hold up, wait. before we go down this route, let's really think about...
Hold up.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right. No, for real though, I'm like, hold up, wait. This is a 12-year-old kid. You cannot tell a 12-year-old kid, detach yourself from all emotion. First of all, that's not gonna work. They've got quite a bit more growing to do before everything levels out.
Yeah.
And number two, what good does you being... go ahead.
If I remember reading my Star Wars movies correctly, that also did not work for a particularly young person, Anakin Skywalker.
We're just gonna do a little bit of murdering of kids. Politely, fuck them kids.
We're just gonna try to do some detachment from emotion. Well, that didn't work.
Legitimately, okay, so this is the reason why when people try to write like this, where it's detach yourself from emotion, you don't need it, I'm like, I think Avatar did this the best is because legitimately Aang could not imagine a world where he didn't emotionally connect to people, and I'm like, even if he wasn't the Avatar, that would still be the correct answer. You can't emotionally reject everything. Do you know how sad your life would be?
Yeah. It is one of those things that I find interesting that it so often comes up in stories of a, like, oh, detach yourself from your emotions, this is the path to enlightenment, or, I mean, whatever the rationale for detaching from emotions is. But I actually think that it misses what the whole point of that is supposed to mean, in that it's more about control than, like, cutting off.
And
like,
it's...
you need to have control of your emotions, not, like, they don't exist.
Right, like, there's a vast difference between being emotionally unavailable and just being in real good control of your emotions.
Mm-hmm. Like, if I may bring up a personal example for myself, I have taken an opposite approach to yours when it comes to the sadness of the news. I just can't help but read it and feel sad. Like, my background is history and politics. I can't help but know what's going on, even though it's sad. But a large part of how I am able to deal with that sadness is that I am able to more or less compartmentalize it in a analytical box, an analytical framework, so to speak. So it's not that I am sad about many things of the state of the world, but I'm able to keep it from overwhelming me by having it in a specific framework box that I keep it in, so to speak. It's not that it's cut off, it is like, it's not that I have detached from those emotions, it's that they're in a very specific mental box that I access in a very specific way to keep that from overwhelming me.
Oh, see? That sounds good, though.
Yeah. Particularly necessary because I do have an anxiety disorder, but it is very likely therapy that I have done on that anxiety disorder that helped me to develop those tools to be able to deal with all of the sadness that is so often in the news. Like, I originally was using those tools for things within my personal life, but I was able to use them for something else as well.
Hey man, more power to you.
Yep.
Well, I know that we've been talking about it, and I'll say it, I've said it to you before, and I'll say it again. empathy is its own superpower, is because it's very powerful, is because it gets you to the emotional level somebody else is on.
Yeah.
Without it drowning you. Which I think is something that a lot of people fail to realize. Like, you can drown in your own emotions. You can drown in other people's emotions.
That is very well put, Hella.
Aw, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, here. This is like when you listen to too much sob stories. And I don't mean that like they're trying to gain sympathy points. I mean that literally like depressing stories and stuff.
Yep.
You start to get melancholy. You start to get depressed. It's because your brain is like, we can only handle so much, Captain.
Yeah, we are being overwhelmed by the sorrow. The tears are sinking the ship.
Legitimately, the tears are sinking the ship.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I know if I say it like this, it's gonna come off wrong, but also there's no other way to say it. So, you can write your really depressing, like, melodrama any day of the week. But I beg of you, put 1 inch of, like, a funny moment in there, because you're gonna drown somebody with this much tears.
But Hella, how will it be declared great classical literature if it's nothing but sad?
Oh, boo, whatever. I think I had more fun reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because of how over the top it was than I ever did reading anything written like A Tale of Two Cities. Pick a direction, my guy. I know you're getting paid by the word, but we're dragging here.
Yeah, I don't remember if I've mentioned this on a previous tea time or not, but I had a English teacher in high school where I don't recall if I had said it to them directly or if they had overheard me talking to someone else in class, but I will never forget their response to my saying of, like, all of these stories that they require us to read are depressing. And her response to that was, as I somewhat alluded to before, oh, if it isn't depressing, it can't be classic literature. And, like, she was saying it as a joke, but from all of the books that I was required to read in school, I feel like there is too much of a kernel of truth in this for my comfort.
It is. It's... okay. So, super hardcore tangent on this. I remember for my freshman reading class, because I was in advanced English, our book that we had to read and write a whole paper on for that semester was The Road. For those of you who've only seen the movie, it's the one about the guy with his daughter on the road avoiding cannibals. Viggo Mortensen played him. I don't care what his name was. The reason I bring this up is because I was told that this was a really deep piece of literature. I read all of it. And because I'm a fast reader, I read it again because I was like, maybe I missed something. And I read it a third time at lunch because I was like, am I still missing something? And I finally got to my answer after the 4th reread. This is a, like, super mega, like, cough medicine-induced fever dream. What am I reading?
I'm impressed that you read through it that many times.
Well, the first time was because I needed to write my essay on it, and I was like, I feel like I'm being me. Maybe I should go back and reread it. The second reread, no, I was right the first time. This is not good. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just being too obtuse. So I literally followed my parents in while they were doing their paperwork. I was like, can I read this out loud to you guys? And like, sure, what book? And I was like, The Road, and my dad looked at me, he goes, get out. He's like, no.
Nope.
And that should have been my cue right there of, they have war memories of this, and they told me no.
Yeah, the only book that I recall ever reading more than once, like, intentionally from what was required in school was Ender's Game.
Yeah, but the first Ender's Game was actually really good.
Yep.
And then it got weird.
The thing. Like, I think that the first Ender's Game book was good, and I had never got through any of the other, through its sequels because, yeah, it got weird.
It's hard to explain how it got weird to people, though.
Shadow series, though.
I know that there was a movie called Ender's Game, and I remember watching it and going, I feel like we're skipping scenes, but for the life of me, I can't figure out which scenes we've skipped.
Yeah, they definitely skipped some scenes, and they definitely squished other ones together. I think honestly, I think the two major problems was that because Ender's Game is dealing with, like, young children, it's really hard to capture in film. I mean, not just young children, but like brilliant, genius level young children. It's just really hard to capture in film. And secondly, Ender's Game, the book, covers like, I don't know, 8 years, and that is hard to do as a film.
Right. It's the reason why when
they
I...
kind of had...
Oh, go ahead.
They kind of had to squish it down to being like a couple of months.
Right. What's the reason why, and this is... Okay. I say this and I don't mean to make it sound mean, but Lindsay Ellis made a point of, if you watch her Odyssey, like, stream, she talks about Lord of the Rings and everything. She talks about the fact that the Lord of the Rings movies are condensed down really, really, like, into the span of just the movies for all 3 books. But in actuality, the whole journey takes about 6 to 10 years. You can't translate that into film without making people, like, go brain dead. So it's like, we have a limited time. We're gonna have to cut, we're gonna have to squish, and we're gonna have to definitely cut out whatever we can and still make this a believable story. And they did, in movie format.
Yep. Yeah, I've usually heard, like, 6-ish years as the travel time. But I don't recall if that includes, like, any of the long breaks. Because I think they hang out in Rivendell for, like, 2 years or something.
That's not including how long were they actually in the Shire year-wise before Frodo Baggins finally got off his ass and left.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because the difference between when... if my memory serves, I think the difference between Bilbo leaving and Frodo leaving is like 2 decades.
Yeah, I understand.
Like there is a huge time skip there in the book.
Right. It's also the reason why when M. Night Shyamalan made the Avatar movie, other than the fact that it was just... No offense to M. Night Shyamalan and the people who worked on that movie and in that movie... It was just very poorly paced, and we kept focusing on things we absolutely didn't need to focus on.
Yeah. I have not seen that movie either, but at least from what I'm told, there was a lot of things in that movie that were basically we have this line here, or we have this specific scene, so that you can go, I remember that from the TV show.
Right.
As opposed to, like, moving the plot forward.
Right, and I don't know how many times they bring up that stupid library, but they bring it up in a whole awful lot, and I'm like, the library wasn't even that important.
Well, I feel like we have really gotten off the beaten trail now.
Oh no, I'm about to circle it back. The reason why I bring up the Avatar movie is because in the Avatar movie, they cast that one guy as Uncle Iroh, and I was like, oh, maybe this will be the saving grace. You cannot possibly ruin Uncle Iroh in movie format. And they did!
They still managed to pull it off.
Which I'm like, how do you ruin a character that's like, copy-paste the dialogue, my guys. Copy-paste the dialogue.
Would the dialogue enough have been able to do it?
I don't know. Probably not.
Because I do feel like when talking about a story writing of Iroh in TV show format, to try to duplicate that into something else would be near impossible to do well.
Yeah, just...
I mean, especially considering that in my search for, like, other characters that were written in a similar way and executed well, I came up with Shepherd Book. And that was about it.
Yeah, like it's a very small list, I realize. But also this tea
Yeah.
time still was very productive, and the only thing I want to end on is that in The Legend of Korra, you get to meet Uncle Iroh, and Uncle Iroh's only actual good tidbit of information is when he gives Korra, like, this line.
You see,
I can make the sun shine?
even in the material world, you will find that if you look for the light, you can often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will ever see.
And the line is basically, like, if all you're gonna look for in the world is darkness, you're gonna find it. And I'm like, what a profound answer. If all you're gonna look for is all the bad shit in life, that's all you're gonna find.
Like, holy smokes, I should be writing that down. Put it on my wall.
If all you look for is the darkness will always find you. Which is actually really interesting. Okay. Remember how we were having that discussion forever ago about literally the superpower of literally having your fingers be guns? Like, it doesn't change into it. It's just, you make finger guns, you do the pew motion, and it actually fires bullets.
Yep.
Okay, so Sammy, God bless my editor's wife's heart. She's amazing. I was talking with him about this. Celestial was literally like, that's such an overpowered, like, superpower, though. I was like, no, do you know what an overpowered superpower would be? Having the power of, like, legitimate darkness. To just walk into one shadow and have it transport you somewhere else in the world because you just decide, fuck traveling by normal means, I'm just gonna shadow walk. Like, that is an overpowered superpower. Then he was like, but what about when it's a bright sunny day? I was like, there's still shadows during a bright sunny day, sir.
Yep.
It's like, the darkness is everywhere.
Just put something up to block the sun.
Right, and he was like, why would you say that? I was like, because even if the shadows on a bright sunny day are super, like, not as dark, right? They're just like a really dark chalky gray. They're still shadows, which means in theory somebody that has the power of shadow manipulation would never be at a disadvantage because it's always dark somewhere. The moon is always out. How do you plan on beating me?
Everything casts shadows and light.
Right, and he's like, you'd have to make literally a counter power for that. I was like, the counter power for that, I think, is literally just being like a human nightlight. Like, stop! You're so bright it burns.
I glow. No touching.
Right? It's like, I'm about to break you overnight and shake you like you're a glow stick. I don't know if it's like a threat or an innuendo, and I'm both scared and aroused.
Is that a good ending point? Is that a good thing to end the tea time on?
Yeah, we can end the tea time there. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you for having me on Tea Time again. This is always wonderful.
Thank you for showing up. Have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. Bye!
Bye-bye!